I would show some theory as applied to the guitar fretboard, and a way maybe you can use some pretty basic theory concepts to get interesting sounds. A basic premise is the structure of the major scale, and then combining notes of that major scale to create the structures that we use all the time in music. If we put those on the fretboard, I think that becomes a pretty useful and usable tool for improvisation and exploring sounds that maybe you hadn't thought of. So the easiest way to start this is to just map out on one string a major scale. So when we play this note, it sounds like middle C on the piano. Now, going up that third string from the 5th fret, we just move by whole steps and half steps in the sequence that they are dictated by the major scale structure. So we go from C up whole step to D, whole step to E, half step to F, whole step to G, whole step to A, whole step to B, and a half step back to C. So again, from here, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And one of the things that music theory students have been taught to regurgitate on command is a major scale starts on the root, and from that root it goes whole, half, whole, half. And that's fairly cumbersome. I think the easier way to look at it is to just remember that it's whole steps and half steps. The only half steps are between the 3rd and 4th note of the scale and between the 7th note of the scale back to 1, which is the 8th note of the scale. There are only 7 notes in the scale, so note 8 is the same as 1. Now, most of this is something that I think everyone is pretty aware of if they've been playing for a while, had some real basic understanding of theory, or even just looked at a piano keyboard. These things are fairly obvious. So when we build chords, this is where we're going to kind of depart from what the real nuts and bolts theory is and just turn it into shapes on the fretboard. From this note, C, if I skip a note and skip another note, I'm playing the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes of the scale. So that's a C major chord. Well, if you look at that as a shape, I'm playing 5th fret, 5th fret, 3rd fret. To turn a major chord into a minor, a major triad into a minor triad, I'll use that term, we lower the middle note. So this is a C major triad. If I lower that middle note, it becomes C minor. Now, the triads in a major key are major and minor and diminished. The good news is there's only one diminished. So now that we know the shape for major and minor, we know 6 of the 7 triad shapes in this key. Now we just follow the structure of that major scale that we traced up the 3rd string and put the appropriate triads on the appropriate notes of the scale. The 1, 4, and 5 triads, or the triads built on the 1st, 4th, and 5th note, are major. The triads built on the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th note are minor. The triad built on the 7th is diminished. Now, let's go ahead and look at a diminished triad. If I lower the 3rd of this major chord that I'm starting with, major triad, sorry, it becomes minor. If I take the minor structure and lower the 5th, which is here on the 1st string, that's diminished. So, triads are built of 3 notes, and those 3 notes are found by starting on a particular note of the scale and then skipping up. So if I'm on the 1st note of the scale and I want to build a triad, I use the notes 1, 3, and 5. Just so happens that the root of that chord is 1. The 3rd of that chord happens to be the 3rd scale degree, or the 3rd note of the scale. And the 5th of that chord, and again, these are terms we use for the members of a triad, root, 3rd, and 5th. Well, when we're building that triad on the 1 chord, the root is 1. The 3rd is 3 of the scale, and the 5th of that chord is in fact the 5th scale degree. When we build a triad on the 2nd scale degree, the notes of the scale that we use to construct that chord are notes 2, 4, and 6. However, we still label those 3 notes of that chord or that triad as a root, third, and fifth. That's where part of the number labels become a little confusing. So let's just assume that we've got this shape for major, this is the shape for minor, and this is the shape for diminished. So as we go up the scale, our 1, 4, and 5 are major, 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and 7 is diminished. Our resulting chords are major on 1, minor on 2, minor on 3, major on 4. Now remember that there's only a half step between 3 and 4, so my root of my 3 chord here, there's the root of my 4 chord, my 5 chord, 6, 7, and we're back to 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're back to 1. The next step in harmonizing would be to add one more note on top of that stack. And so to create the sound of a 7th chord, we would just skip one more note from the top note of the triad, and the resulting sound is 1, 3, 5, and 7 of our scale. Our 2 chord is going to be constructed from 2, 4, 6, and 1. 3 is going to be 3, 5, 7, and 2, and so on. So here again we have some categorized chord types that we can group together. Our 1 chord and our 4 chord are major triads. They both have this size of an interval on top. So I'm stretching a 5-fret span. My C major triad, C, E, G, 5th fret, 5th fret, 3rd fret, and then I'm stretching up to the 7th fret here. On the F, starting on the 10th fret, same structure. So again, just remember it as a shape on the guitar and apply it that way. Our minor chords have that size of an interval between the 5th or the top note of the triad and the 7th of the triad. Now it just so happens that the 5 chord has that same type of interval on the top between the top note of the triad and the 7th. So that one is unique. So 1 and 4 have the same type of triad and 7th. The 7th, of course, is the top note when we stack one more note on top of the triad. The minor triads all have the same size interval between the top note of the triad and the 7. Now the diminished triad has the wider span, the 5-fret span. So now we have this set of sounds.